children safe online. I am Paula, your host. I am a dedicated cybersecurity professional with a passion for OSINT and digital forensics. This podcast is a safe, supportive space where we share real-world tips to help parents, carers, and teachers protect children in today's digital world. No fear, just practical advice and empowering insights to help you feel more confident in navigating online safety. Our guest today is Debbie Garner, a rare voice blending law enforcement, technology, and policy to tackle some of the toughest challenges in child protection. Debbie is a retired ICAC commander, FBI National Academy alum, and now a strategic leader in digital safety innovation. She's here to help us understand how law enforcement is evolving and where parents, platforms, and policy still fall short. Debbie, welcome. It's an honor to have you here. For those who may not be familiar with your work, could you give us a brief overview of your background and expertise?
Sure. I spent 30 years in law enforcement with the same agency in the United States. I worked for an agency called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and I had a variety of assignments during that time, everything from narcotics investigations to terrorism intelligence, general investigations, including rape, robbery, homicide, political corruption, officer-involved use of force. I worked healthcare fraud for many years, but the last 8 years of my career was spent as a supervisor over our agency's child exploitation and computer crimes unit. And whoever holds that position in the GBI, in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, is also the ICAC commander for the state of Georgia. And ICAC stands for Internet Crimes Against Children. There's an entire task force system. And I ran the task force in Georgia. And essentially what our mission was to detect, investigate, and help prosecute instances of online child exploitation. So I retired from law enforcement about 4 years ago, but I am still in the realm of the anti-child exploitation space. I work with technology companies who make tools that help, extract data from mobile phones and provide digital forensics training. I help try and lobby for legislation here in the United States. So I'm still in that realm, but not an active law enforcement officer anymore.
Wow, that's an amazing background you have there. I will start in hot with some questions.
Okay.
How have online child exploitation tactics evolved over time, and how are offenders becoming more sophisticated, or are they just faster?
So, gosh, over time, it's changed in so many ways, really, over time. I started in the child exploitation space in October of 2013. And prior to that, people used to trade, child sexual exploitation material, or in the law in the United States, it's still known as child pornography in many states, but we prefer CSAM. But it was hard copy photos that were mailed through the postal service. That's how people used to trade images, of children. So technology changed that. The internet changed that. So with one of the biggest things is just the advent of the mobile phone. People, it used to be so much more difficult to produce child exploitation material, and now everyone has a camera in their pocket. So production, taping the abuse that they were doing became easier. So that's sort of on a like starting the technology trend now. With the advent of or the ease and use of Tor networks or VPNs, things like that, to hide their activity. that certainly has affected the trade, trading or the distribution of CSAM material. Artificial intelligence has certainly changed the game, and in producing or altering photos or images of child sexual abuse. So people, as technology changes, offenders are becoming more sophisticated. Some of the technology is not that hard to learn with a simple Google search. So they are becoming more sophisticated, but technology is really actually fairly easy to use. So I don't, I guess that would be what I would say about that.
Okay, that's a very interesting answer. I have a curiosity. What did a typical case look like when you were in law enforcement, and what was the most frustrating about the whole process?
So, well, I could probably talk for hours on this. A typical case was, I'll divide our cases into two types: what I will call a reactive case and then a proactive case. Most of what the ICAC task forces work are reactive cases, and we call them cyber tips. Cyber tips are actually received by law enforcement from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I'm going to back up just a little bit. All of the internet service providers like Microsoft, Google, Comcast, all the apps on your phone, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snap, TikTok, all of them are required by federal law in the United States to report instances of child exploitation that they find on their platform to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They determine which ICAC task force it goes to, and there are 61 ICAC task forces in the United States. Wow. So every state has at least one. Some states have more than one, but they are referred to those task forces. And so in Georgia, I received all of those cyber tips for our state that were referred to us from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And those reports may be from anything from someone posting, CSAM material, child sexual abuse material. Maybe they were trading it. Maybe there were chats, that involved grooming. It may be indicators of child sex trafficking. So there are a lot of different types of reports that would come to us, and they varied. The information contained in those varied. Some had very little information that were passed on from the electronic service provider to NCMEC to law enforcement. Some had a large amount of information. Most were somewhere in the middle, but then we would investigate those. Law enforcement then investigates those reports of instances of child exploitation that an internet service provider has reported. Now, what is most frustrating is that a lot of times they don't provide enough information in the report for us to even initiate an investigation. So, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe they don't keep all of that information. Maybe they only report in in the cyber tip. Maybe they only report a standard amount of information or standard fields of information. So there was often not enough information in a report in a cyber tip for us to really initiate or work a really great investigation. The other frustration would be the overwhelming amount of these cyber tips. So, and the stats are all on the NCMEC website. It's missingkids.org. But last year, or over the last few years, they've received approximately 30 million cyber tips, and give or take a few million. So in Georgia, we received I think this year, we've received 38,000 cyber tips just in Georgia. And we have to go through all of those, and we don't have the resources or the personnel to do that. Law enforcement does not have enough resource personnel or digital forensics tools, hardware, software, resources to work all of the cases. And there are cases where law enforcement has information and great to work a great case to help safeguard a child, and we will never get to it because there is not enough time or personnel to do it. So that's really the biggest frustration. So that is what a typical case looks like. We do have proactive cases where we are chatting online as a child, and there's very specific rules that we have to go by. There are peer-to-peer software investigations that we can do that are proactive, that are going out and seeking people who are actively trading CSAM online. So there are proactive cases as well. But because of the overwhelming nature of the cyber tips and the number of those, proactive work often gets pushed, deprioritized.
I understand. Before I go further with my next question, you just mentioned something very interesting. You said that in United States you have 61 departments for this. Do you have any information or knowledge how many are in Europe?
Okay, so a little bit about the task force system in the United States, and then I will answer your question.
That's okay.
The ICAC task force system in the United States, again, there are 61 task forces and every state has one. Some states have multiple task forces. And those task forces are made up of other other agencies as well. So in my state, I worked for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and there were 280 law enforcement agencies in my state that were part of my task force, and we all worked together on this problem. We would train and equip them to help us work these cyber tips. Now, I know in Europe, the law enforcement system is not the same. You have national law enforcement, and it's very different. So there is nothing similar to the ICAC task force program in the United States in Europe. However, there are plenty of agencies that are working internet crimes against children across Europe, across the world. Admittedly, we all work together. Just because I'm in the United States, this is a crime that knows no geographic boundaries. So while I might have a victim or a suspect in Georgia, and if I'm still in the United States, the victim or a suspect might be in Idaho or Washington, D.C. or Florida. So we have to learn to work together. That happens internationally as well. So we actually reach out across country borders often to work together. And there are lots and lots of law enforcement in Europe that are working these types of investigations. And NCMEC reports cyber tips to them as well. So, while they report them in the United States to the ICAC task forces, they have law enforcement agencies and contacts in Europe and throughout the world that they will also pass cyber tips to that resolve to those countries. So while it's not it's not the same type of system, they are working these types of cases.
Thank you. I really wanted to highlight these differences because many people believe that, it's US, we are untouchable. But we are actually not untouchable. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Alexander McCartney. I think it was one of the gruesome case that happened not only in Europe. He was convicted in Belfast last year. But when I heard and when I learned about that case, I didn't know if I should be happy that I'm contemporary with him and he was actually convicted, or if I should be terrified due to the information and the gruesome case that it was done.
Both feelings are appropriate. So those would be normal feelings. NCMEC has stats. If you're talking about like the volume around the world, NCMEC has stats about which countries get referred the most cyber tips, and those are on their website. The United States probably gets around, it's either 3 or 7% of the cyber tips, and the rest go internationally. But that's all over the world. So most of the cyber tips that are reported and referred from NCMEC are international cyber tips, which is amazing to me, because just in the United States, we're getting either 3 or 7% of the cyber tips, and we're overwhelmed. We can't work them all. So, and the rest of them going internationally, I would imagine that the problem is the same throughout the world. There are not enough resources to work all of these cases globally.
Unfortunately, yes. As far as I don't work in law enforcement, but as far as I know and as far as my knowledge goes, this is an international problem, and unfortunately, there are not as many personnel as they need.
Yes, absolutely. And I've talked to colleagues in the UK and Australia and like in other countries in Europe, and it is the same problem everywhere.
Let's move on a bit.
Okay.
One challenge that we often hear about is how slow tech companies can be in responding to law enforcement's request, especially when it comes to how to say, requesting for more information or
Right.
different chats or groups or so on. What's causing these bottlenecks?
So I would say that there's a variety of things. Believe it or not, they always don't have the resources in that department as well. So all of the companies that I named, all of the major internet service providers, all the apps on your phone have what they call a trust and safety department. And they also have a department that responds to legal process from law enforcement. So imagine them also not having enough resources. There's this massive number of cyber tips, and law enforcement gets these cyber tips and then requests additional information with whatever legal process is appropriate in their country. And the internet service providers accept those, and they have to query their systems and pull out the data and prepare it. And they're just going through all of these legal processes. This amazing amount of cyber tips affects them also. They're reporting it to NCMEC, then they get legal process back, and it's a whole process for them as well, and they too often don't have enough resources. Some of them, you could argue that they are not prioritizing properly. The safety of children, they should be prioritizing getting this information, the information that law enforcement needs to law enforcement. But everyone has finite resources, and they are prioritizing them for business purposes in these companies. And from speaking with them, most of them truly want to make their platforms safe. They do not want to make them unsafe, but they have a ways to go. There are certainly things that they could do to make their processes more efficient.
Wow. I believe, or at least I hope, none of the CEO that invented any platform had in mind that they will help exploit children. I don't think that was their purpose at any moment.
No, and I know a lot of them are just now realizing how prevalent it is on their platform, whether they sort of turned a blind eye for a while and prioritized other things. A lot of them are now realizing they must make their platform safe. And there's a concept, safety by design, and they are true. I think most of them are truly trying to make their platform safe, But in order to do that, they have to hire programmers and engineers and people to make the decisions on what changes to be made to make their platforms more safe. And then there's always, they're taking into account privacy, and they're taking into account laws in every country. And it is no easy task. Do I think they could be doing better? Yes, but I'm not going to pretend that it's an easy task for them either.
No, I don't. I don't think it is,
Yeah.
especially with, or at least I'm looking in Europe, where you have. Please don't judge me, but I think there are 35 countries in European Union, and they all have their laws and their regulation and all of these things. And yeah,
And different languages. So like the companies have to moderate and accept legal process, and in all those different languages also.
yes,
So it isn't. Like you mentioned that you didn't feel as though it was intentional. They didn't intentionally make a tool or a product that would host this type of material, but now they're having to deal with it.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the unfortunate side.
Yeah.
Coming back to law enforcement, are there major gaps between local, state, and federal enforcement when it comes to CSAM cases? And what can be done to close them?
So in the United States, we have the local, state, and federal law enforcement, and I will say that for the most part, we work together pretty well. There are things that the federal law enforcement agencies can do better than the local and state law enforcement agencies, and vice versa. So the things that federal law enforcement can do better are things that maybe are much more cross jurisdictional, or if they are doing undercover work on the dark web, or trying to take down a VP, trying to investigate VPN companies that allow these types of transactions to occur, or this distribution to occur using their tools. So those are sort of larger investigations, and the local and state agencies are probably better suited to work the types of cases that I have been talking about. So, but we all work together. I know in my task force, I had local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies that were part of the task force. We worked with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We worked with Homeland Security investigations. We worked with the Secret Service. So, and they were all working these types of cases, and we all needed each other. So, can things get a little territorial occasionally? Yes, but that wasn't the norm.
That's good to know. That's
Yeah.
actually great to know.
Yeah.
It's very nice to hear and know that police prioritize territories over safety, and this is a great thing to hear, especially from someone who already been in the force.
We definitely prioritize collaboration and the safety of children over who gets credit for anything.
That's good. How has encryption and anonymous platform like Tor complicate ICAC work, and are there any legal levers left to pull?
I mean, it is a huge issue, end-to-end encryption and the dark web and even VPNs are definitely where people who are even just a little bit technology savvy, that's where they're going, because you can figure out how to use these things just by a simple Google search. You can figure out how to download Tor easily. And so it is a huge issue. Does it make it a little more difficult, a little more time consuming to use those tools? Yes, but they also are trying to hide what they're doing. And yes, it is absolutely complicated ICAC work. It makes it where we cannot see what they're doing. We are not able to track, trace, um, um, there are no signals that it's occurring. So, there are agencies who will do investigations related to VPNs and Tor, mainly federal agencies, but not exclusively. But it has absolutely made it harder because we can't see that activity using the normal things that that are used to find this activity. So as far as legal levers to pull, that is probably going to take some legislation, but is probably going to be more technology levers than legal, because those things, the dark web, Tor network, VPNs, encryption, they're not going away. We will just have to learn to combat them with other technology.
I understand. I know you're a person who bridged the law and technology, and I would like to know, what does a good collaboration between law enforcement and platforms actually look like?
So when I first, and if you're talking about platforms like the electronic service providers, that's what, like Google and Meta, and okay. So when I first started in October of 2013 in this type of investigation, we had meetings at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that included NCMEC, law enforcement, normally maybe 10 or 15 of the ICAC commanders throughout the country, and some of the major platforms that were reporting to NCMEC. And we started those conversations, and we talked about, law enforcement would inform them, hey, this is hard for us on your platform, or can you please try and save this information for us? And they would be like, well, why do you need that? And we would say, well, the reason is because of this, and we would start those dialogues, and they would say, well, we can't do that because it's against our business interest, and so we would try and come up with solutions that were okay with both, because they wanted to keep children safe. We just had to come up with a way for both entities to be able to do that together. So those conversations started a long time ago. We developed relationships. We built great relationships, and those sort of continued over time, even as turnover in law enforcement and turnover in those companies occurred. So great collaboration really is surrounding a lot of communication, a lot of dialogue, and genuine relationships. And law enforcement and these platforms have tried to do that. Now, are we still at odds about some things? Yes. Do we agree about everything? No. But the fact that we can get in the same room and have a conversation about both entities' challenges is progress.
It is. Do you have an example where a tech company or a startup made a meaningful difference by engaging early or seriously with safety and law enforcement?
So Google has a team that, a lot of the cyber tips are found by electronic, signal tools that they're using to find images and, keywords and chats. A lot of them are they're finding those things. But several of the larger platforms have investigative units. And when a particularly egregious cyber tip, or something is occurring on their platform, they will investigate that and proactively send information about what is occurring. And most often that might mean that there's a child in danger right now of being abused, and if that's the case, they would go about it two ways. They would send the cyber tip to NCMEC. They would send it as a priority cyber tip. NCMEC would immediately send that to law enforcement, and sometimes the platform would also send that information directly. They would call the commander, they would call me and say, hey, we feel as though this child is in immediate danger and we need to let you know. So those things do happen where a platform realizes we have enough information where we actually think that this child is in imminent danger, and we are going to report that directly to law enforcement. So that those things do happen.
You mentioned a couple of times oh my god,
That's okay.
Mick.
Yes.
I cannot pronounce the name correctly.
It is hard.
My apologies. What exactly is that? And can any, I have a purpose for this question, I promise. Can any civilian go there and report or
Yes.
pick up some cases?
Yes. So on their website, you can go and report instances of child exploitation that you found online or that are occurring to you. As you probably know, sextortion is a huge issue right now. And they have a reporting mechanism on the missingkids.org website where anyone can go, even children that are being, sextorted online, to go and get help. So you can go and self-report on the NCMEC website as well. I mean, I think it's one of the first things that pops up. Do you need to report an instance of child exploitation?
Okay. Can any civilian pick up cases from there?
No, so not necessarily. I know that there are organizations here in the States that that help find missing children, but what they do is they will do that. They will use open source intelligence information that they develop, and then they will simply provide that to law enforcement. So there is nothing that NCMEC will give to civilians to work on. But, missing kids are very publicized. There are the names of they're on the NCMEC website. It's in local, if local law enforcement or local news stations and things like that. And so there are people who will use their skills and work on a case and then provide that information directly to law enforcement, and that's probably the appropriate way to do that. There are some task forces that are nonprofit organizations here in the States. National Child Protection Task Force is one of them, where people volunteer their time, and they are mainly open source intelligence experts, investigators, and they will work together to develop information in real life cases and then provide that to law enforcement. So there are places where you can volunteer to do those things. It just has to go through sort of the correct channels.
I understand. Now, without giving anyone any ideas, my curiosity was because I have a question for you. From your perspective in law enforcement, how helpful can civilian OSINT investigator be in supporting cases, particularly those involving online child exploitation or digital threats?
I think that civilian OSINT investigators can be very helpful, but I think that it's unfortunately law enforcement is not going to provide them with information that investigative information for a variety of reasons. So they would probably start with publicly available information and use their open source intelligence skills, tools, tradecraft to help add to what law enforcement, what's already in the news, that sort of thing. So they can help. And then also joining some of these organizations that do work with law enforcement. They've developed those relationships and they have developed a trust. That is one way. But as far as someone working for, like a civilian working for a law enforcement agency without being an employee, then they're probably simply going to be able to develop their own information and just pass that to law enforcement and hope it helps.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. You did
Okay.
the question. That's why I say I don't want to give anyone any ideas.
Yeah.
Please don't.
Vigilante type things are not necessarily looked upon favorably by law enforcement, even if the intent is genuine and good. There are a lot of reasons why, people shouldn't necessarily go and try and do things on their own. But if there is an OSINT practitioner who has information, they can certainly pass that to law enforcement.
Thank you. Based on your experience and everything that you've done until today, how can an independent researcher collaborate meaningfully with law enforcement in a way that's both effective and respectful for the investigation, and still keep in mind boundaries, like exactly what we talked,
Sure.
vigilante thing here?
Mm-hmm. Probably working with, and I don't know if there are any in other parts of the world, but like I said, National Child Protection Task Force here in the United States. I know there's another organization that does similar work called Skull Games here in the United States, and they work directly with, they are volunteers who they have to go through a background check. They use their skills to help law enforcement, but they are already, the group as a whole has a representative that's already connected with law enforcement, and they work directly with law enforcement as volunteers. That would probably be about the only way, unless you are gathering information from news sources, publicly available news sources, and then trying to add to that for law enforcement. But then it would just be doing that on your own and passing it directly to law enforcement. That would probably be about it. There are, when we talk about law enforcement here in the United States, there are law enforcement professionals that are not sworn. They are not, they do not carry a badge and a gun. They do not have arrest powers, but they do law enforcement functions. And one of them is a criminal intelligence analyst. Most often they are not sworn here in the United States, and they are the ones that use their OSINT skills, to help with these cases. So you could also simply get a job as an analyst, and work on these cases with law enforcement as an employee.
So always go to the appropriate channels.
Yeah. Yes.
Collaborate with law enforcement.
Yes. Yes.
Because we are in a big boom of an AI, and I think we are in an AI era. Do you think AI-based detection tools are living up to their promise, or they are creating new challenges?
Both. Not so. I remember it was probably 15 or 20 years ago when facial recognition was just coming out, and it had a long, we looked at it. It had a long way to go. I was not in ICAC world at the time, but I was in our intelligence unit, and we looked at it, and it really was not very useful at the time, but I knew that technology would improve, and that would likely improve with it. And it has. So, AI-based detection tools, if we're talking about facial recognition, they have definitely helped. AI detection tools related to CSAM, they are still being developed. Do they live up to their promise? They're getting there. I can see them improving, month after month, but I don't know. There's always going to be false positives. It's always going to take a human to review what the AI has detected to make sure that it is actually what it says it is, whether it's a person or whether it's CSAM material. There are AI-based detection tools that are finding unknown CSAM. We normally find CSAM using hash-matched databases, hashes of images. There are AI detection tools that can find unknown CSAM now, but you do get a lot of false positives as well. So those are still being detected or improved, and they are there's certainly a tool that are worth using, but I don't know if they're living up to their promise. Now, creating new challenges, artificial intelligence is also, if you're talking about generative AI and creating CSAM that did not exist before, whether it's using a real child or a real person, and then using that to create CSAM, or generating CSAM from, that is not starting with a real person. So that is definitely a new challenge as well. And it creates a lot of different challenges for law enforcement.
Thank you. I just want to make, for everyone who's listening and they are not tech savvy, hash image is not does not equal with a hashtag. They're two different things.
Correct. So I'll tell you my non-technical version of a hash value.
Okay.
So it is a numerical value assigned to an image that is completely unique to that image. And there's also photo DNA that is similar but different from hash matching. I know were you getting ready to describe it also? What's your definition?
I would say that it's a fingerprint of the image.
Yes.
And it's not something that can make the image popular. So it's a bit different.
Yes. Okay. Right.
That's my simplest way of telling parents, because I had someone who said to me, what metadata is. And I try to explain, like the metadata is all the information that comes with the picture, the phone. Well, these days everybody makes picture with the phone, but the camera and all of these things. And she looked at me and she was like, yeah, it doesn't matter because I don't understand. That's why I wanted to say that the of an image is not the same thing with hashtag.
Right. No, it is not the same thing as a hashtag. You are correct.
Working with CSAM and everything that involves all of these things, it can be mentally challenging. So my next question for you is, the mental load of investigating CSAM can be extreme, but what system did you put in place to support your team? And what would you recommend to somebody who either works with CSAM or wants to work with CSAM?
So it is a very heavy investigative type, there are lots of challenges. Not only are the law enforcement professionals and even those at NCMEC and the ISPs viewing horrific content. This is as bad as you can imagine. This is, and we don't necessarily need to go into that here, but it is as horrific as you can imagine. I had supervisors that just simply thought we were sort of investigating teens sexting and didn't realize we were investigating, infants and toddlers being sexually abused. So it's horrific images. And then the workload is also incredibly mentally taxing because, like I mentioned before, they have this overwhelming workload and they know that there are children associated with each cyber tip and that they have information that may help rescue or safeguard a child, and they will never get to them all. And that really affects their mental well-being. So we do, in my work unit, we did things like we saw a mental wellness provider twice a year. We had group discussions that were led by a mental health professional or a peer support counselor or things like that, where we would just talk about what it was, some of the issues that we were having. What's it like to parent as an ICAC, as someone who investigates these types of crimes? We parent differently, or we have different worries. So group discussions about a variety of different things. We had resiliency training. What can you do to keep yourself mentally well? We had a lot of work flexibility. If someone had just really seen something that affected them immensely, no questions asked. They just got to leave. They just, so a lot of work and a lot of work-life balance type of flexibility. Me as the supervisor, I didn't care when people worked as long as they were getting their work done. So if they needed to go to a baseball game or wanted to always pick their child up from school or within reason, because we did have things sometimes during those times, but on a regular basis, they were able to do those things. So being supportive of your personnel, providing them training, to deal with the stress, talking about it, and creating a culture where it's okay to talk about it. For so long, law enforcement has been, rough and tough, and we don't, nothing bothers us. Well, it does. So creating a culture where it's okay to talk about those things and admit that, no, this sucks. Those are some of the things that we did to help support the team, and the same things that I would recommend for others to do.
Did you ever notice any particular mindsets or personality traits that helps officer either thrive, or do they struggle more in this kind of space?
I guess I will. Gosh, I might have to think on that one for a bit. I think what I would say is that everyone's personality that I've worked with adapted to the stress in using the personality traits that they had. So we're all a little bit different. We're all built different. Our brains operate differently. But as far as personality traits that maybe, I don't know that these were safeguarding or, characteristics, but the people that I worked with were incredibly mission driven. So when they were under stress, the mission is sort of what kept them going. The fact that they knew that they would likely rescue a child or safeguard a child, or, those things helped. So mission driven, very passionate. They were all very intelligent, but I don't know that these are necessarily safeguarding traits for yourself. I think everybody adapted the way that they knew how.
Okay. I give you an example, so blame it on me. Is this myth a myth, or is it true? For example, if you're a person like me, let's not give anyone, where, for example, I can compartmentalize very well a lot of things. And sometimes it's very, if I say very easy, might be wrong, but I did not work and I did not see what you saw. Let's start from
right.
I watch a lot of Criminal Minds, and sometimes it's easier for me to compartmentalize things and think like, oh, this looks like a TV show.
Right.
And this is my coping mechanism.
Coping mechanisms.
But in the same time, I can be very sensitive at something like Titanic, and I'm crying my eyes out like everybody else, because we all know that Rose could make space for Jack and Jack still drowns.
Yeah.
Is this so is my sensitive part a downgrade for what I cannot work with that?
No. So almost every law enforcement officer or law enforcement professional, both sworn and non-sworn, has to compartmentalize. We learn either it comes easy to you or you learn it over time. It is definitely a coping mechanism that all law enforcement has, and it's whether it's if you're working in the CSAM, ICAC arena, but patrol officers see horrible accidents. Crime scene specialists see horrible violence. So law enforcement professionals learn over time to compartmentalize anyway. But if you lose your sensitivity also, that is actually probably when you are in trouble. So you have to, and I know that this podcast episode isn't necessarily about wellness, but what we're getting into is burnout and vicarious drama and what we call compassion fatigue. And when you start losing your sensitive side or your sensitive nature and not caring, that is when your coworkers should be worried.
You are right. This is not about wellness, but I did wanted to highlight that even the people that they work with this, they do have feelings. They do cope
Absolutely.
in a different way, and they are human. Most of all, they are human. So
Yes, absolutely.
we need to understand that when you think that nobody cares, they are actually overwhelmed with a lot of things. You mentioned a bit earlier that in a year you got 30 million.
Nick Mick received 30 million cyber tips.
It's a lot only to say it. When you need to go through it's just burnout there. So
There was
yeah,
just in Georgia when we were receiving, our cyber tips in Georgia, we had one person to go through and look at all of them. All they're looking at is this material all day, every day, and we had to make sure that that they took breaks, that we would ask them, hey, how are you doing? You want to go to lunch? You want to go for a walk? You want to, like, then there were certain things that we had to put in place to help them deal with that.
and that's amazing from your side and from everybody's side. That, as you said, yes, law enforcement is not only big badass who breaks the door. They do have feelings.
Right.
Everybody,
Yes.
they do have a mental health that needs to be taken care of.
Yes.
Coming back from that to my next question, from your experience, what are the most common mistakes that parents make when it comes to digital safety, and how can they do it better?
I mean, this is a tough one because, parents are working and they're taking care of the home and they're, going to ball practice and, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, like all of these things. Um, so, but what I would say is know what your children are doing online. So there's some very basic safety rules. My kids are grown now, but some of the safety rules that we had were you are not to communicate with anyone online that you do not know in real life. You know, now that helps to a certain extent, but if you go into the statistics that most abuse is actually perpetrated by people that children know, that doesn't really necessarily help. But still, don't talk to anyone online that you do not know in real life. Do not allow them to follow you. Do not allow them to connect with you, whatever that is. Early on, I was telling my kids, do not take images of your body parts, nude images, and send them to anybody. I don't care if it's a friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, someone you like. That's just one of those rules. It was, their accounts had to be set to private. Going back to don't follow or connect with anyone you don't know. When my kids are adults now, but there are more robust parental safety features now that parents can use. It's super difficult to know all of the safety features on all the apps that your children use. But what I would say is that if your child is on Instagram, then you probably need to have an Instagram account and know how it operates. Follow your child, see what they're posting. There are internet safety and internet classes, internet safety classes training that for both parents and children. There are some great tutorials on the NCMEC website, which I've mentioned several times, but there are resources all over the internet. IWF, or Internet Watch Foundation, has some, In Hope has some, Thorn has some. There are great places to go but there are really some basic rules that parents can implement. And I would say, know what your children are doing online. And it's tough, it's time consuming, but it's vitally important.
Okay. My next question would be, what signs should a parent look for if their child is being groomed, especially when the child doesn't realize it, or if the child is reluctant to go to the parent?
I mean, this is a common problem. I would changes in behavior, hiding things, staying in their room when maybe they didn't used to. And when I say changes in behavior, changes in school behavior, grades, who they're hanging out with, or if they're not hanging out with their friends anymore, all of these things. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that could be indicative of all sorts of problems, but that is sort of when you need to intervene and figure out what's going on. And that is when you look in their phone, ask them, who they're speaking to online, that sort of thing. You do need to, there are debates about whether you monitor your child and whether you don't. When they're very young, you probably need to be monitoring them. As they get older, you can give them more freedom online. Those types of things. Once you feel, that they are following the rules. But one of the most important things is that you develop a relationship with them and a dialogue with them that they can come to you with no matter what. One of the most important things that we tell parents in, say, a sextortion, situation, is that to praise the child for coming to you, because a lot of them don't. A lot of them try to handle it on their own, and sometimes it has led to suicide. So, developing truly sitting down with them and saying, I don't care what it is, if something if something bad is happening to you online or any, offline, then, you can come to me and we will work through that together. So, but, if part of your question was if the child doesn't really realize that they're being groomed, there are examples online. There's articles, there's YouTube videos, there are things that you can show your child, talk through with your child to sort of show them it's not just them. They are being manipulated by someone else that is likely older than them, but they are being tricked and manipulated. And there are plenty of instances online where it's occurred to someone else, and showing them examples, might be a good way to help convince them. But the most important thing is establishing a dialogue with them about this and talking about it often.
I have a tough question for you, so feel free to not answer if you're not comfortable with it. But you mentioned that you're a mother, and being a mother and being a law enforcement specialist, I would like to ask you, how young is young? When you need or when you should approach conversations like sex, conversation like grooming, when you need to open up these questions. Because I give you one example. I'm originally from Romania, and in my country it was a big scandal that two children, probably around 13, 14, something like that, they had sex and they videoed themselves,
Right.
and posted on social media. When you're a parent, and I often hear this, oh, my child doesn't do that, and he's 30. We don't talk about that. Oh my God, no sex. That's untouchable. But when it comes to it, you realize that your child knows already more than you think you know.
Yes, absolutely. So, I'm going to answer. There's two things I want to say. I'll talk about like the age, and then I'll talk about some examples of what you're talking about from my experience.
Okay.
I don't know that I'm going to give you an age because that sort of varies for every family, every child, every parent when they think it's appropriate to start talking about the things. What I would say is whatever is age appropriate, and by that I mean when they're younger, when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, you can start talking about, because they are already playing with mom and dad's phone. Maybe they don't have their own, but they that, hey, not every, you can start telling them things about, not everybody online is wants good things for you. Not everybody on the phone, on Facebook or on Instagram, or not everybody is who they say they are, and like sort of start. And it's just part of it doesn't need to be one conversation. It needs to be just something, even showing them the text messages about scams and, all of these things. Oh my gosh, I got another scam text message. I got another, all internet safety is not just about child exploitation. It is about such a wide variety of things. So, and you were talking about kids or parents not realizing that their kids already know more than they say. Since I retired from law enforcement, I have had 5 of my friends or work colleagues call me, most often late at night, and say, it's always been a boy, but this does happen to girls. My son did something he shouldn't have. He sent a nude picture, and now someone is extorting him for money. That's 5 times. These were all great, good families. Their parents had talked to them about online safety. They had talked to, the boys were anywhere from 13 to 17 that had done, that they had done this. And so they said, what do we do? And so I led them through sort of the steps that are normally suggested for someone who is being extorted because they sent a nude image. But again, the first thing that I told them is, please praise your child for coming to you, because there are some children that didn't and they committed suicide instead. So please, and tell them this is not their fault. They may have made a bad decision, but it's not their fault. They were being tricked by an adult, manipulated by an adult. So it does happen to kids of all ages, both boys and girls. And I guess to go back to really what your question was, start early. On the NCMEC website, there are conversations as young as kindergarten that you can have with them that start this, talking about online safety.
Thank you. We will post all of these resources in the video description.
Yeah.
So look down below, you will see them.
Yeah. Yep.
In your experience from law enforcement, what role do survivor voices play in shaping smarter law enforcement and policy today? And how can agencies avoid re-traumatizing those they've sworn to protect?
I mean, it's a good question. It's something that law enforcement probably still needs to work on. I will say that intentions are always good, but admittedly, like, I'll say that my office probably could have done this better. Now, I've been gone for 4 years. Maybe they've improved, and I'm not saying we were bad at it, but there's things that we could have done. But it was a matter of, we rescued a child, got them to resources, and then we moved on to the next case. It was law enforcement's role. We were doing law enforcement's role, where I think that there probably could have been some times where we could have slowed down just a little bit and dealt with the victims in a different way, because it's not just the child, that whole family. If we are going in and arresting someone for these crimes, the rest of the family is a victim too, not necessarily just the wife, the other children, we are upsetting an entire family. So hearing from those victims sort of maybe how we could have handled that differently certainly is something that law enforcement needs to listen to. And I know that this is a conversation that law enforcement is having. Do we do it perfectly? No, we don't. But it is something that we're aware of and trying to improve on, across the ICAC community. There are survivors now of CSAM that are adults now.
Yes.
That that will say my images were, were shared when I was younger, and they could very well still be out there. And I wonder when I walk through the grocery store if anyone recognizes me. Like those are real things that we need to listen to. And then also, though, that's over time, but also at arrest. But those are also other entities need to get involved. That's not, I don't want to say it's not law enforcement's responsibility. It's not law enforcement's lane. We have our part to this, and then other entities have their part, but law enforcement could definitely do things a little bit better, especially with human trafficking victims, talking to those who are being trafficked and gaining trust. When being interviewed and things like that, there's definitely things that law enforcement could improve on.
Thank you. As we approach to the end of this episode, I would like to ask you, what gives you hope that we can turn the tide against online exploitation of children?
The people that are working these cases are incredibly intelligent, incredibly passionate. It's not just law enforcement, it's the digital forensics providers, the tool providers that are making the tools that extract the digital evidence from phones and computers and analyze it. It's them working with law enforcement, working with lawmakers, working with the public and other entities that are providing services to victims. It is a very mission-oriented and passionate community. And I think that's probably what gives me the most hope. We don't have enough people, we don't have enough resources, but the drive and the passion and the knowledge and intelligence and expertise is definitely there.
Thank you. If you could update one law or policy tomorrow, what would it be?
So I actually belong to a lobbying organization here in the United States called Raven. And Raven was founded by people like me, former ICAC commanders, and a few other people in the anti-child exploitation space. And we formed Raven to lobby the United States Congress for additional funding for the ICAC task force. And here in the United States, that law is called the Protect Act. And so that would probably be what I would want to work on, is that Protect Act. It also describes how the ICAC task forces should work, and it hasn't been updated in quite some time. So I think it would really be an update of that and more funding allocated for these types of cases. There are other laws related to age verification on platforms or device-based age verification for phones. And there are some other things that I would love to see happen. Some laws that would require platforms to be a little bit more responsible, or for what occurs on their platforms. So there are some things that need to be worked on, but they're very nuanced, and both entities, or I guess all entities, need to come to the table. The platforms, law enforcement, lawmakers, the public, parents, all of them need to be in the same room when those things are being developed.
That's so nice. You describe it so beautifully. And my last question to you is, how can our listeners help, whether they are parents, teachers, or just concerned digital citizens? How they can help?
I guess I'll say education, like truly teaching kids how to be safe online, especially parents and teachers. And there's all sorts of other people in children's lives, coaches, clergy, but parents and teachers can definitely teach kids how to be safe online. If we work on prevention and teaching children how to be safe online, some of these things could be diminished, prevented, those types of things.
Thank you. I would like to thank you not only for coming to this show, but for your decades of frontline service. And thank you for shaping the future of online safety with clarity and compassion. And also thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for having the conversation with me.
I'm so happy that you've been here. Have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
To all our listeners, we hope this episode gave you insight and tools to help guide young people towards ethical digital path. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for more conversation that keep our online spaces secure. Stay safe, stay informed. Bye bye.